just want to welcome you all. So thank you for joining us and for being part of the growing Hello Alice community. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. We know entrepreneurs are very, very busy wearing a lot of hats. So we're so proud of you for taking a moment to learn and connect with your community to grow. My name is Danielle Telleria, and we have some incredible panelists with us today, and we'll be diving into the topic of designing your pitch deck. So I will be making those formal introductions in just a moment. I'm with you all today from Miami, Florida, and I have the pleasure of working on Hello Alice's marketing team. So I'm one of the very, very lucky ones that gets to spend my days learning from, connecting with you, our community of small business owners, and I just feel very, very lucky. So I'm going to introduce myself in the chat right now. And I hope you all do the same. So as you join, make sure that you tell us your name, your small business, maybe even drop a social handle so we can keep the conversation going and keep connecting long after this webinar. So, and I also want to point out that in that chat window, you're going to see a blue box, and you want to make sure that that is marked for panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messaging and we can all continue to connect. And if you're new here, welcome to Wonderland, and I'll tell you a little bit about Hello Alice. So Hello Alice is a free to join platform for small business owners like you, and we help you navigate the wonderland of entrepreneurship. It's our mission to make sure that you have the funding opportunities, the learning resources, and my favorite part, the community that you deserve to grow your small business. We firmly believe that when small businesses win, we all win, and we want to thank you for being here and being part of that community. So if you're here with us today in this webinar, you're at the point in your business where you're ready to bring on investors. And whether you're absolutely ready to bring in investors, or you're just thinking about it, or you want to know when is the right time to do that, you're in the right place no matter where you are on your journey. Today, we're going to dive into one specific topic, but know that no matter where you are in your journey, there will be valuable information and actionable insights for you to take away today. So we've worked with our, I see that our chat is disabled. We are working on that. So give us one moment and we'll get that up and running for you all. So we worked with our friends at Silicon Valley Bank to put together a self-guided learning experience for you all. So what we did was we created a milestone, which is essentially a compilation of 3 how-to guides that include actionable information that can help you reach your fundraising goals. So today we're going to be focused on guide number 2, which is all about designing your pitch deck. And we're going to answer your questions on this topic. We're going to really dive in with our expert panelists because we know investors are up to their eyeballs with pitches. So if you're lucky, you might get a couple moments, if that, for them to skim yours. So we want to make sure that you understand that you need to make a very, very great first impression. And I think that's just a life lesson, right? First impressions matter, and they're very, very important. So in a moment, when we get that chat up and running, I'm going to be sharing a helpful link stock. And this helpful link stock, or the link to that helpful link stock, will have different links to blog posts. You will be able to access one blog post that has all of the guides that we're talking about, these how-to guides, if you want to reference it. And we also encourage you to know that this learning experience is 100% self-guided. So you can jump in and out at any point, and you can use that blog post to check out the first guide, which was all about determining how much to raise, or jump to guide number 3, which is all about closing the deal. So really you can go in and out whenever you'd like to learn. So, and I want to encourage you to, once we add that helpful link stock, if you are, running your business, picking up the kids at school and just listening to today's chat, I'm going to say the link out loud so that you have that. And it is hialice.co/SVB-webinar-links. And remember that those dashes is that hyphen, that minus sign. So it's hialice.co/SVB-webinar-links. Okay, so before I introduce the panelists, I just want us all to get in the right mindset and really start thinking about the pitch deck. So start to think about the questions that you have, what you want to get out of today's webinar, and just really just sit with it for a second. What do you want to get out of today's webinar? What's one question that you really want to ask these experts while you have them here at your disposal today? So let me introduce our incredible panelists while you all start thinking. So Micaela is a vice president of startup banking at Silicon Valley Bank in San Francisco. In this role, she's focused on founder success for pre-Series A technology startups in Northern California. Micaela is passionate about supporting founders, in the most critical early days of launching their businesses and building scalable platforms that can help them achieve their goals. So Micaela, if you want to unmute and further introduce yourself, and I'd also love to know, what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the phrase pitch deck?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much to the Hello Alice team for having us on here today. I'm Micaela. I am originally from New Hampshire. Have been in the Bay Area now will be 7 years this fall, and have been enjoying the lifestyle, weather out here. Kind of haven't had to deal with those New Hampshire winters anymore, so very happy about that. Prior to SVB, I was with a startup that I joined straight out of undergrad called Alpha Sites. They're in the expert network information services space. After that, spent a year and a half at JP Morgan as a business manager within their technology investment bank, and just joined SVB this past February. So just about 4 months into my time at SVB, and really loving the team and the culture and the work we get to do, which is super interesting and gratifying, and really giving back to the founder community and helping with things like investor introductions and the topic that we're going to talk about today. To answer your question, Danielle, when I think of pitch deck, I think immediately what jumps to mind is just you as the human, you know, especially in these early days of your business, you are the idea. And so at the end of the day, you're really selling yourself, in kind of striking that right balance between, you know, confidence, but also humility, authenticity. And so I think in some cases, like some of the best pitch meetings might involve ones where you don't even have to go that nitty gritty into the slides, and you're really building kind of an authentic personal connection and relationship.
Thank you, Micaela. All right, next up is Sophie. So Sophie is a vice president at SVB on the startup banking team, where her primary focus is strengthening and showcasing the early stage startup ecosystem in her hometown of Los Angeles. She's very passionate about the positive global impact that new technologies can have, and she is committed to fostering inclusivity and diversity in the startup industry. All right, Sophie, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and same question, when you hear when you hear pitch deck, what comes to mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Sure. Hi, everyone. From the chat, we're having some technical difficulties with the chat, but super excited to be here with Hello Alice. And, you know, thank you for tuning in today. You know, Micaela and I have very similar functions. You know, she's repping for San Francisco. I'm repping for, you know, LA. We have other team members in different geographies doing work. You know, my background is split between, you know, I was doing more government, international development, social impact, and then I entered into the tech industry, actually working on an ed tech startup when I was in grad school. So I was in the, you know, business owner founder seat, and then failed miserably. And so, you know, something that I have a lot of empathy for and understanding, and seek to give as much advice as possible on, like, hey, these are the mistakes I made, don't make those mistakes, right? As well as generally getting to see, you know, who's been really successful and why, and, you know, who's kind of struggled, and really, you know, again, excited to have the opportunity to share this, and then have, you know, Jen representing LA as well, you know, on the investor side, really, really cool. So happy to be here. I'll say that for pitch deck, what comes to mind is concise. So, you know, in as much as you can clearly share the information and have it be pretty prominent and not have a lot of slides, at least, you know, not that's in the appendix, I think that's always the way to go. The more efficiently you can get your message across, the more strongly it will be taken by the people who are receiving it.
Thank you, Sophie. All right, next up we have Jennifer or Jen. I'm going to call you Jen because we're friends now. So
Perfect.
Jen Richard is a principal at Bonfire Ventures. So prior to Bonfire, she sourced and executed seed stage investments at Vitalize VC and Cross Culture Ventures. Before beginning a career in venture, Jen was a founding member of 3 venture-backed startups and saw 2 of them through successful acquisitions. So Jen, do you want to unmute and tell a little bit more about yourself? Yes, definitely claps. Congratulations on all of your success, and introduce yourself. And again, tell us what you think when you hear the words pitch deck.
Great, thank you. So like Sophie mentioned, I'm also an LA native. Have spent a lot of time here in the tech ecosystem where I was an operator in startups, primarily in the e-commerce and the ad tech spaces. After kind of going through this entrepreneurial stint, I went to business school at UC Berkeley, where I then transitioned into venture capital. And I've now been an investor for a little over 4 years. I I'm focused on SMB tech. So I run a newsletter called the SMB Syndicate with 2 other VCs that I'm close to. And I also spend a lot of time in the commerce enablement space, which is where I spent a lot of time as an operator. So really excited to get to join the Hello Alice community for this panel today. When I think of pitch deck, I actually think of a story, and I think that most great pitches and most great decks, especially when you don't have a voiceover, really need to have draw in the reader and really need to create some kind of emotional connection to the problem that you're solving. And so if you can come up with a great story that shows that through data and pictures, it goes a really long way.
Thank you, Jen. All right, so before we jump into questions, I want to level set. So our chat seems to be disabled, but no worries. We can use the Q&A. So I see some of you all have already been doing that, and I encourage you to do that. So down below, you're gonna see the Q&A box. You wanna click on that and it will pop out. And here is where you're going to want to include any questions that you have for our panelists. This will be the best way that we see your questions and can get them answered. And also in that Q&A, you'll see open, answered. So if you click on the answered tab, you will see questions that have already been answered. And my colleague Brittany has shared the helpful links link in there. So if you want to, again, down below, you'll see the Q&A bubble. You want to click on that. It will pop up, and you can ask your questions there and also see the link, the helpful links doc, which is hialice.co/SVB-webinar-links. So we already have tons and tons of questions coming in for our experts. I'm so happy to see it. I want you all to make sure that you remember this is called an Ask Me Anything event. These experts are here for you, so take advantage and ask your questions in the Q&A, and make sure you check out that helpful links doc throughout our conversations. And as a friendly reminder, we record all of these sessions. So you will, in that helpful links doc, see that first blog post, and in that first blog post that includes all of the different guides, that's where we will be uploading the recording. So you want to make sure that that is bookmarked so that you can check back there and look at it forever after, so that you can catch up and re-look at all of the notes and hear all of the expert advice in one place. So, okay, are my panelists ready for our questions? Because we have tons coming in. First up, I'd love to get started with Jen. So we've said it before, and it definitely bears repeating. Investors are busy, right? So they don't want to, or I wouldn't say they don't want to, but they don't have the time to read a novel or watch a feature film about your startup or your business, right? They want highlights. They need it to be quick and engaging. So as someone who sees so many pitch decks, What do you think are the most important things to include to make sure that you catch the attention of a busy investor?
Yeah, great question. So for one, I cannot emphasize how important it is to have the deck be aesthetically nice to look at, because the second I see a deck that looks like it was just thrown together in PowerPoint or in Microsoft Word, and just like using very bare minimum, design resources, it just makes me feel like you're not taking your business or your story that seriously. And I know this is a challenge for a lot of founders because you're working with limited resources. You may not have any funding yet. And I understand that, but you have to think about the fact that your deck is being compared to all the other ones that are coming in. And most founders are finding some kind of design help that can make it look nice and very professional. And so I think that's number one. Like the second I open it, I can see the aesthetic. Does it look good? Number two, you need to tell the story and answer basic questions like, who are you solving for? What are you solving with? Why are you solving this problem? How long is it going to take you to do it? And where are you now with the business? And if you can answer those 5 questions in 10 to 12 slides where I can flip through quickly, it just makes it so much easier. I have to know who your customer is. I have to know what the problem is and how important it is to solve, what your competition looks like, and also what's your traction, what are you raising, how much are you raising, to even understand if it's a fit for our firm.
That's such great advice, Jen. Thank you. Okay, next question is for Micaela. So we touched on some terms in the first call, but want to make sure that we go over them again for anyone who didn't catch the initial webinar about determining how much to raise. Let's talk about, and let's do a quick refresher on a lot of these terms. So give us a quick refresher on the types of data investors like to see when evaluating a business and the terms like TAM, SAM, and SOM.
Yeah, happy to, Danielle. So as we spoke about, and we'll probably dive more into the nuts and bolts of what comprises a really effective pitch deck, you're probably going to start out with your product. What problem are you solving? Kind of the high level vision, that hook that Jen mentioned, that's going to really build a narrative and, draw your reader or your audience in. Typically, the next portion, you're going to want to get into really sizing up the market opportunity and showing that you've put some thoughtful analysis and consideration, and you have a realistic projection of who is your customer base, and kind of who can you realistically target and achieve over time. And so those 3 key terms, think of them as almost a kind of waterfall effect. So we're going to start like super high level, the biggest piece of the pie, and then we're going to narrow in from there. So the biggest piece of the pie is TAM, which stands for total addressable market. And this is really just the user base that exists out there in the world for your product or service. And I'll go through a real life, very simple example after I explain the 3 terms. Second is SAM, which is serviceable addressable market. This is really like the realistic number of customers that you can reach. This is taking into consideration things like regulations, logistics, market access, kind of being realistic that, even if your target market is technically like every human being on earth, they might not all be serviceable, right? And then the third and kind of final, more focused market base that we're looking at is SOM, which is serviceable obtainable market. And this is really the specific customer base that you can reasonably service under your current strategy, right? This is a more realistic projection of who you can go out to, today, tomorrow, next month, and target and make a customer of your product. So let's talk through a real life example. Let's say I'm launching a women's hygiene company, tampons, pads, something that's universally applicable, let's say, to every female on the planet. My total addressable market for this might be, let's say the world population I just looked up is 7.7 billion, and let's assume half of them are female, right? So 3.75-ish billion people out there might be my total addressable market for this product. But when I really think about what's serviceable, there's not going to be the entire demographic might not be able to afford my product at its certain price point. Or let's say it's an online delivery service for this product, and therefore there's folks who are living in regions that won't actually be able to access the product via delivery, right? So that's where I'm kind of narrowing in now on my serviceable addressable market, which for the sake of this example, let's just focus on geography and say that I'm only going to be able to ship to the United States, right? So now I'm looking at the US female population as my service addressable market for my product. Serviceable attainable market, let's say, our shipping facility as of today actually can only ship to 5 different states. And we do the demographic and price point analysis again, and we see that limits us to 30% of the population within those states that we can reach through our current marketing efforts. We're only tapping into a few different channels of how we can even access that customer base. That's going to narrow down that population further. So that hopefully that just illustrates those 3 terms, and I'm happy to take questions, or if Sophie or Jen want to jump in. But this would be like it's a very pivotal piece to being able to illustrate to your investor that you have a realistic sense of what the market opportunity is. There are people out in the world that want and need this product, and this is how I feel I can bring it to market and feel I can realistically achieve it, keeping in mind as well, like competition. Who else is out there making this feminine hygiene product that might be better than mine, and what are we up against in terms of their capabilities around marketing, logistics, et cetera.
That was a terrific explanation of those terms. So I don't know if either of you have anything to add, or we can move on to the next question.
No, that was great.
All right. So Jen, what do you find most compelling in a pitch deck? Is it a strong problem statement, clear financials and projections, solid team, or is it really a combination?
I would say that it's really a combination. I think that the purpose of the pitch deck is to for the person on the receiving end to be able to quickly understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so I get countless amounts of pitch decks where I'm reading through, and by the time I get to the end of it, I still have no clue like what this company is actually doing, what their product is. And so I think it's a combination of being able to clearly show like what your product is, also to be able to really clearly show your traction. So something else that's really important is when I get a pitch deck, I get so many that are, we are a B2B firm and we invest at the seed stage. And so is this a fit for my firm? Are they clearly a B2B business? Are they clearly at the amount of traction that is the right fit for a seed round? And so I think it's a combination of not only telling what you do, but also making sure that the investor on the other end knows that this is an investable opportunity for them that they want to take a actual face-to-face call for.
Thank you. Okay, this question is for Sophie. It's one that we received through Instagram from a small business owner in the community who asked, could you please discuss how to protect your idea, concept, or MVP when pitching to an investor?
So the short answer for this is that you cannot, and I've had this question asked of me. Now, I will add to that, look, when you're working on something that's truly at the edges of technological development, there is an understanding with investors that you speak to that like, hey, this is meant to be kept confidential. And there are companies that will be in what we call stealth mode, either due to like a hyper competitive market, or again, like, really unique technology. An example of this is one of my friends was working for a, AI robotics company creating this product for, children on the autism spectrum, and they were in stealth for quite a long time. And that is, again, because this is pretty sophisticated technology. Usually, if you're working on something that, is out there in the market, exists, most successful businesses actually are not necessarily technically, super sophisticated. It's just about, the execution. You don't have to feel hyper protective of, your idea, your business. Generally there's no non-disclosure agreement signed as you're speaking about it with people, as you're putting a pitch deck together. There's a lot of elements of trust necessary, warranted. But there is an element of risk, of course, that, you may have this grand idea and you're sharing it with people and someone takes it and runs with it. However, it's not great ideas that turn into great businesses. It is great teams and it is great execution. So it is actually doing the hard work of getting that out there. So, I think the kind of subtext under that answer is like, how do I make sure I'm protected here? And again, the answer is you're not really protected. However, that doesn't need to be as much of a concern. Your concern is just, really being the best founder, entrepreneur, CEO of your company and steering that ship. And there is a level of being, transparent with what you're building and how you're doing it. When it comes to, again, anything proprietary, it's understood by investors or other people in the ecosystem that you're not going to go into that granular of detail. But overall, yes, you should be sharing the idea and, feeling a bit more open with how you're discussing it conceptually, because again, it's not the idea that will make it great. It is, how you implement the idea.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a couple more questions that are trickling in. Well, actually, a lot of questions coming in from those watching and listening. So this question is from Heather. Heather is asking, as a branding pitch deck professional, I'm always excited to learn more how I can improve my ability to help other founders. I always love to ask, what's the best pitch framework you can always rely on? So I guess that's the question. What is the best pitch framework that you can always rely on?
I'm happy to take this one, and then Jen and Sophie definitely jump in. We have a great article about this on SVB Startup Banking, which I'll drop in the chat right after this. But I think a general kind of 4-part framework that I've seen and I think has been really effective is starting out one with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is your product and service? How is it helping the world in some way? Apologies. And what's going to hook in this investor and to capture their attention and keep them interested, so they're not, to Jen's point, getting to the end of the deck and they're like, what the heck is this? What even is this company? What do they even do? So making that super clear up front, appealing to hearts and minds at the beginning. Secondly, probably going into the some of those market sizing points that we just talked about. So what is your TAM? What is your SAM? What is your SOM? What is your competition like? What are some of the risks and considerations at play in terms of tackling and getting access to that target customer base? And how is it helping solve that problem? How are you planning to do it? Third is really something around like growth plans, right? So whole point of raising money is implementing that against a growth strategy. Once you get those funds, or if and when you have them, how are you actually going to use them to grow? And what are going to be some of the key milestones that you'll encounter by when, so that this potential investor has a really clear roadmap of, if I do, pass along my hard-earned dollars, especially ones that I owe a return to my LPs on, how do I know what's realistically going to happen and when? And then fourth, this gets back to my initial response, right? When you said, what do you think of when you think of pitch deck, thinking of you, the founder. I think it's really important to drive home, why are you uniquely positioned to run this company? What is your personal skill set or the skill set of your team members that is going to make or break this idea, right? There's a lot of great ideas out there. Rarely is there that kind of perfect match between the right idea, the right market, and the right individual who's really going to take that forward and make it successful. So just in summary, problem you're solving, total addressable market, what's the market size, what's your growth plan, how are you going to get there, and then why you. But I'd love to hear from Jen and Sophie some other ideas around frameworks, and I hope that also addressed what you mean when you say the word framework.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's really, I think there's a lot of different frameworks or formats that can work. And so I wouldn't tie myself to a specific template. I think the only maybe change I would have, Micaela, from yours is, especially if you have a really good founder market fit, I would actually start with who you are and why you're uniquely positioned to solve this problem, because sometimes having a founder background makes me more invested in, like, oh, they're solving in mobility and they spent like 10 years at Uber. Like, oh, okay, maybe I should pay closer attention to how they're looking at this problem. And then one thing that I always like to see at the end is traction. And so often that'll be on a timeline, or there's a couple of different formats, but when you started the company, what milestones you hit, if you raised any prior funding, where you're at revenue wise now, and then kind of when you see yourself getting to that next milestone, all in one slide as a quick snapshot, because it just helps me really understand what phase of the business you're in, which helps me understand just how I should be viewing the business.
Sophie, anything to add?
I think they've got it covered. Yeah.
I agree. Okay, so a couple questions kind of in follow-up to what we just discussed are max slides you recommend for a pitch deck. How much is too much information? And is a pitch deck mostly a pretty visual of your business plan? And I also want to add on to that, if you've ever seen examples of people going too far in the creative direction. You noted, Jen, at the start of this, that you want to make sure that your visual is compelling and that you're using design resources, but what is too much?
Sure, I can start really quick. I think that so there were a couple of questions there. I think for one, making sure that the visuals with your slide have a purpose or a meaning. And so, I've gotten some where it's just like one of the slides is just a page of visuals. And, like I'd like to see a visual of the product. I'd like to see charts and graphs that show, market size or where you're going with this. I love to see customer case studies. And so sometimes people use some kind of avatar or visual of a customer that's linking them to this problem and how they help this customer solve it. So, I think use your best judgment here. But I would say that 12 slides is the sweet spot for the length of a presentation. I would say like the range is 10 to 15, but if you're going over 15, I think it's too much. And then numbers and too much information. again, I think use your best judgment. There's some really core information that we need to know, which is traction, like current financial progress, like market size, which like that, I don't know. I feel sometimes I skip the market size because in most industries, I kind of have an idea and we're going to do our own back end market sizing anyways, but it's good to include it. And then competitive landscape. But if you are running, long on your slides, but you don't want to take anything out, I would always just use an appendix after slide, 12, 13, or 14, so that the investors can get through the meat of the story. And if they want to look into more information, or if they feel like, having full financials or something else would help them understand if they want to take a meeting, then you have that information there for them, just not within the core story.
That's a good point. That supplemental information if needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Sophie, Micaela, anything to add on those points?
I would just echo what Jen said. I think just keeping it concise, keeping it to the point, playing to your strengths, right? To the earlier point of it doesn't have to be overly templatized. If your founding team is the secret sauce because of some special niche you have in that space, like lead with that. I have heard just anecdotally, like there is a risk of maybe being like overly polished or being overly slick. And so I think you also want to kind of balance, right? That right balance between they want to know that you're spending your time like running your business, not just like putting, special features on your PowerPoint deck, but at the same time, making sure it is professional and visually appealing to Jen's point is super important to hook them in at the beginning and show that you're legitimate and serious.
And I love that point, Jen, that you made about, you can have the visual and the creative visual, but it has to have a purpose, like not just create a visual for creativity's sake. Like make sure that if it's a powerful visual, that it has powerful information in it. So I think that's such a great piece of advice. So now we have our Sherry joining us on stage to ask our question, our first attendee to join us up on stage for this webinar. So Sherry, if you want to unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I was just curious if I'm a designer and I built my own MVP based around my idea as a designer and a writer in the fitness space. I'm just wondering what point, like what kind of metrics for or like KPIs do I need to have in order to even present? As far as like proof of concept, like how much do they need to see? If that's, I don't know if that's a question, but
sure. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'll say, like, I think one of the first things, and we went into this a little bit with the first AMA, but I know not everyone, is joining for all three of them. So one of the first things you want to do is like, determining if you're a VC backable company, if what you're creating is actually going to be something that you're looking to hyperscale. And when I say hyperscale, I mean, are you looking at like something that is a Facebook level business, a Bumble level type of business, a Peloton type of business, right?
Peloton.
Okay, Peloton is a space you want to be in. Yeah. So if you're looking at like, ideally, I want to have a type of exit event, which is to say a large, IPO I would like, or, an acquisition that would be, mega big. And I'm really looking at a large return for who would invest in me, which we would say like a 10x, right? So they really, they want to make, 10 times the amount that they put into you, ideally, if not more. And so, for venture funds, right, and Jen can speak to this, each one's a little bit different, but generally, they have their own investors that they are beholden to, and those investors want to see a return, right? So, first things first is like, what kind of company you're creating. In your case, you're saying you want to be creating the next Peloton. And then right now, what you want to think is, or something similar, right? You want to create something that would be venture backable. So
yes.
at this point and at the earliest stage, you really want to get whatever money you can that is actually not, from, a venture fund, right? This is not, you're not giving away equity in your company, and you're really building out whatever what I would recommend, like the penny gap is. So whatever you're creating, getting somebody to start paying for that, getting revenue, you're creating your minimum viable product, right? So if it's an actual hardware, that can sometimes be more expensive, right? And you may be wanting to look for some funding, but seeing where you can, what we call friends and family, are there grants you qualify for, especially as a historically excluded person, as a woman, where could you build up the business and start to test out who is your customer, right? So if you're creating, let's say, if it's an app, what would be the low list of what you can create, get it out there, and then actually get customers. Okay. Once you're at that place where you're generating some revenue, that's when you start to open up to, angel investors, accelerators, that's usually the step from there. And then usually at that point, once you've gotten maybe, a little, couple $100K, sometimes a little bit more, give or take, and then that's usually where you're now on the path for venture. And my recommendation is, and again, curious if anyone thinks differently, to really think about, like, put your efforts into your business and creating it, as leanly as you possibly can, getting those customers. And then once you're in the space of like, hey, I'm ready, I know I need like $1 million, $2 million to scale out my business, bigger, faster, stronger. But then, you're starting to really talk about the dream of what the business will be when it's really big. The expectation before Series A funding is not that you need to have all the metrics and all the data and be super perfect. But as Micaela was saying over, Sam, you need to know your customer, your audience, who you're going to sell to, and how any capital infusion, whether it's 100,000, 1 million, 10 million, will help you get to that, that growth curve that you want to see.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, because I am new to the financial side, seed money is for my stage, or that's even later?
That's even later. For your stage right now, you'd be looking at friends and family and pre-seed.
Personally, yeah.
Yeah, that's where you'd be like, and seed would be once you have a product, you have revenue, you're churning along, and then, this is kind of typical for what we're expecting. People who've usually had a few companies can start to raise, earlier funds, but that's because they're, a little bit more trusted in the ecosystem. And I'm curious, Jen, as an investor, do you have anything else to say?
I guess one quick thing I would add, I totally agree with everything you said, Sophie. The one piece that I'd really like to double click on is this company venture backable? And there are plenty of founders who raise friends and family rounds or who raise from angel investors who are never able to get institutional funding because the expectation of return is very different. And so, I would actually say that it is never too early to start pitching VCs. Like, go to events where VCs are going to be there, tell them about your idea, because I think that really early feedback is going to be really crucial in how you build your company, how far you take it. Because, like, for instance, when I hear fitness tech, I think very competitive market. And so the expectations for you are going to be different than someone who's building something proprietary and deep tech. And so if you can talk to people that you eventually want to raise from early on and get some really early feedback of like, what exactly would you want to see for my business specifically, I think it'll just make it infinitely easier for you to actually achieve those goals and feel a little bit more prepared when it actually is time to start looking into those institutional rounds.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for joining us, and good luck. We can't wait to see what you do with your with your business.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we've gotten a couple questions about if you should change your pitch deck and adapt this concept to nonprofits, or how do you adapt it when it is a nonprofit? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'm happy to jump in, and I hear that and I get that question coming up. It is a different ball game. So, I actually would say this is not an appropriate question for this environment, because if you're, and trust me, I've been there. When I was working on a tech company, it was like, do we do this as social impact? Do we do not for profit, or what have you? And a not for profit, I have also worked in that space. So that is fundraising for grants. And there's a whole ecosystem of how you would think if you're a not for profit versus how you think about it if you are going to do a for profit business. And everything that we're suggesting here is applicable for profit. And I'd actually even add C Corp. So, that there's a certain kind of pathway you take when you want to have a business that is something that would be, again, what we call venture backable, and that there are many different ways of having businesses or companies or organizations. And then, each of them has their own specific, unique way of how you think about funding it and building it out.
Thank you, Sophie. And I want to remind everyone watching and listening to make sure that you access that helpful link stock. I know some of the information that Sophie shared in response to Sherry's question can be noted in the previous webinar, or also in guide number 1, determining how much to raise. So make sure that you check out that helpful link stock. In the Q&A, go to answered, and you will see that link that we shared, highalice.co/SVB webinar-links. And in that doc, you will see a blog post where we're adding all of the different recordings to the webinars, and you'll be able to access the different guides. So that'll be the one place where you can get all of the information that we're covering across this learning experience. Okay, so next questions are coming in. We have a bunch about what the differences are when you're pitching or creating a pitch deck for angel investors versus VC funds versus seed or Series A. Do pitch decks seem to be different for these different types?
I can, or Micaela, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just as kind of like a precursor, stepping back a little bit. I think just knowing your audience, right? And it kind of goes back to before you even embark on this fundraising process, having a sense of, our angel is actually a better route for me versus a more institutional investor. Right? The bigger the fund and the bigger the institutional investor, there's going to be more pressure on the returns that they need to give back, right, to their LP base. And therefore different criteria and different strings attached with that. So I'd be curious to hear Jen's thought as someone who's actually on the receiving end of these pitch decks. But I would say the short answer would be like, yes, it should be very much tailored to your audience and your investor. And before you even get to that pitch phase, making sure you're actually being connected with the right folks and you've done your research so that this is actually going to be interesting and worth their time.
Yeah, I think that actually, so I agree with that you should definitely send a deck that is going to be applicable to the person on the receiving end. But I actually think that when it comes to friends and family, angels, venture, you're actually creating the same deck, but you're just creating it for different phases in the company's life. And so you're not really going to be raising from friends and family at the same time you're raising from VCs. And so you're trying to answer the same questions. You're more or less building the same deck, but with each of these different types of investors, you're just going to have different information. And I think that you should put as much information as you have at that point in time in all of these decks, because at the end of the day, each of these people want to make a return, but when you're pitching to friends and family, you're probably going to be at the idea phase. So put as much information as you have at that point. When you're pitching to angels, you're going to have probably some very, very early traction. Put what you have. And then when you get to VCs, you're going to have just more data to include all of that. So I think it's the same format and the same framework. It's just, you're just going to be at different periods of time.
Great points. All right, we have Heather joining us on stage to ask a question. Heather, if you'd like to turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask your question to our panelists. I think you're there you are.
Sorry about that slight technical glitch with my camera. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this. So I'm a pitch deck professional. I really appreciate you guys helping me learn how to serve my clients better. And my main question is, we're so used to looking at pitch decks as founders and what our perspective is. And I always find it helpful to think, what are the specific questions that the investors are thinking about while looking at our pitch decks, and any advice you may have about how we can use that kind of change of perspective to inform how we create our decks? Thanks so much.
Sure, I can quickly give some feedback. I mean, I think we talked a little bit earlier about like just the framework and answering, like the main 5 questions, like who, what, when, why, how. And I mean, at the end of the day, like you want to say like, who's building this? What's the product? What kind of traction? How much money do you need? And how long is it going to take to get to different milestones? But oftentimes, as you said, you're so deep in the weeds that often it's hard to see the big picture. And what often happens is you start sending your deck out to investors, you start taking meetings, and you will get feedback. Like, an investor will respond via email, like, can you give me this information? Or in the call, people say, or I say often, like, I didn't see this in your deck. And I think that those are opportunities to actually take that feedback, update it in real time, and to just, make it a living document. That's why a lot of people use DocSend or other kinds of links where you can constantly update, because I don't know if it's possible to ever get it totally right the first pass without getting feedback. So don't beat yourself up if you realize that you've forgotten something. Just create a living document where you can, make changes as they come up.
Thanks so much.
Anyone have anything else to add for Heather?
I would just reiterate. Oh, sorry, Sophie. Okay. I was just going to reiterate what Jen said too on don't be afraid to get feedback ahead of time, right? Before you are in that phase, right? Where you're getting the investor feedback. Obviously you can iterate as you go along, which is fabulous, and kind of phase in that feedback as you go. But I think it's hard to do, right? Like it's very personal. You're very in the weeds on your own product and your own company, but to the extent that you can reach out to trusted people and get that third party perspective ahead of time, I think it's only going to make your presentation more robust. I'll turn it over to Sophie now. Sorry, Sophie.
Yeah, we can jump to the next question. That's fine. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Okay, we've gotten several questions about the word traction. So when we say traction, exactly what do you all mean? And how is this demonstrated at the early stage or even before launch? Really, what is this? What is the magic amount of traction?
Sophie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. And then you can add some color, Jen, specifically from the thesis side for the investments you've made. So traction is really what growth have you seen? And it's a funny one because it's going to be dependent on your company, right? So traction can be users, and you may be even pre-revenue. Let's say like you're a marketplace, or it can be the kind of partnerships you have, right? Because let's say, again, you're creating something that's maybe, enterprise focused. And so it's maybe not necessarily the quantity, the number of sales, but that you have made, a certain number of partnerships or relationships, can be just the number of sales. Essentially, it's however you would show that I am getting, I'm getting that sum, I'm getting into that serviceable, obtainable market, serviceable, addressable market, and I'm getting out to this large TAM. And this kind of thing is like the arrow that you want to see going up. So you want to tell the story of like, hey, my business, we've been in the market for, I'll give an example of a company that is in the market now. I won't name them, but it's a period product, right? A natural period product. And they've only just launched, I think a month or two ago, but they're already in health food stores here in Los Angeles. And they've been asked by some larger grocery chains, like, hey, we want to have you in the grocery. And now they're like, oh, wow, we need money to actually produce enough of our product to get it in there. And so this is traction, right? They're getting, interest from retailers. They want to have it out there. They can show how many units they're selling, that's increasing, and it's happened within this amount of time. Again, like the magic number is highly dependent on the type of business that you have. The more it's like a direct to consumer or to consumer product, it's going to look vastly different than something that needs like a ton of money to go in, because it's, like a very tech heavy product. And the traction for that will be a little bit different. And the expectations from anyone who would put money in you and the type of growth they'd want to see is different. Jen, I don't know if you have specific things you want to add from your side as an investor.
No, I think that covered it really well. I pretty much echo everything you said.
Thank you all. Okay, we have a couple more moments left and tons of questions. I know we won't get to them all, but I want to try to squeeze in a couple more. So a couple questions about video. So better to use a written deck or video-based deck? Should you have a video component? And if you create a video, should you use it on your website or, anything more outwardly facing? What are your thoughts?
I can quickly jump in. I would say do not make an all video deck, or if you make one, also make a just a normal format. I think that like as investors, we're just creatures of habit. And if you try to like force someone out of their normal flow, which is reading through a slide deck, you might get mixed results. I do often see product demos that are within the deck. And I actually think that's really cool, where I can like quickly reference all of the numbers, like do a quick look before I have a meeting to refresh my memory. Those are the benefits of a written deck. But also if I want to get a better understanding of what your product does, I can watch your video. I don't really care where it's hosted as long as it's accessible. So that would be my quick feedback.
Okay, we are almost at time, so I'd love to go around the virtual room right now and have each of you share about the most memorable pitch that you've ever seen. If you can tell us a little bit about that, and then share the one thing. If you just hope that everyone watching and listening got one thing out of today, what you hope that is. We'll start with Jen.
Wow, this is a really good question. And actually, I would say one, like the most memorable pitches I've had, and it's unfortunate the environment we're in because everything is virtual, but have been just founders coming up to me at an event in real life. Not even necessarily like an investor meet founder event, but just like an ecosystem happy hour, and like can spot me out, like maybe say like, I wanted to talk to you because I know you run the SVB syndicate, or because I know you worked in e-commerce, and just like tell me about their company in an authentic way. I think it's just so much easier to connect with people in person And those interactions are a lot more memorable, especially because we have so few of them. And so there's actually a founder that did that recently that I think we're hopefully sending a term sheet to next week. So very effective. And what was the second part of your question, or was that it?
If you could think of one thing that you hope everyone watching and listening got out of today, the biggest point, best piece of advice, biggest takeaway, what would that be?
I think it would be twofold. Use a designer, and also like, don't worry about what phase you're in, if you're too early or not. Just like go for it and get as much feedback as you can.
I love that. Okay, what about you, Sophie? Most memorable pitch deck, and then the number one thing you hope everyone takes away from today.
Yeah, most memorable pitch I saw actually was a team that was effortlessly going back and forth. There were 4 founders, and they even had a couple other people who I think were, sort of founding team, and they had done such a good job practicing it, and everyone who owned the aspect of what they were talking about, somebody's on the product, somebody's, the engineer, somebody's the business person, the salesperson, and they kept going back, they went back and forth, and seeing that unity of the team, and seeing this, how well practiced it was really wonderful to see, because that is super important too, like, who are the people? And I'd say that sort of lends itself to the story. And I think that's the important thing that, Jen kicked us off with, right? That the story of what you have and how compelling it is human, right? At the end of the day, we want to feel excited and inspired by something. And so when that shines in what you're creating and when you can get that story across, it's always a very strong experience.
And your number one takeaway?
Oh, and that's the takeaway of have a story. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, got it. I love it. Okay, Micaela.
I'll bring us home. Yeah, mine would have to be it was a CPG company, but they did a really great job of kind of blending the concise slides with video. And they used the video. It wasn't a product demo, but it was more of their introduction to their founding team, where each of them spoke, and kind of in Sophie's example, you got that feel for the kind of unique personalities and how that team was uniquely positioned to solve this problem. So I'd encourage you guys to, again, be creative around kind of blending those two formats in a way that enhances your special value prop. And then last thing to leave you with for today is probably just be authentic, be yourself. I think you want to be confident, but I think there's a borderline of overly confident can read as arrogant or dismissive. And so I think striking that right balance between being confident in your product and idea, but also being extremely realistic and humble about the challenges you might face, the constraints that exist in your market, and kind of taking those questions or that criticism with a healthy dose of humility.
I love that. And to add to all of that, these are incredible pieces of advice and great takeaways. And I just want to encourage you all to not be intimidated by what you don't know. Ask the questions, ask your community, ask the experts, ask your friends and family, and never be ashamed of what you don't know, because you just don't know it yet, and you will know it, and you will get there. And there are so many people rooting for you to do just that. So thank you so much for being here. Check out that helpful link stock. I know you've heard me say that 85 times in the last hour, but I'm going to tell you one more time. Go into the Q&A right now and make sure that you copy and paste that helpful link stock so you can access it at any time. It is hialice.co/SVB-webinar-links. You will find here links to a lot of resources we've discussed today. The first link on that page will bring you to a blog post that has all of the guides we've discussed, all of the how-to guides that are in partnership with SVB and Hello Alice. And it's where you will find the recordings of this webinar, most importantly. So Jen, Micaela, Sophie, thank you so much for offering up your time and wisdom to our community. And thank you all for watching and listening and learning with us. We encourage you to check out the next one. Make sure you stay connected, and the best ways to know about everything that's going on in the Hello Alice Wonderland is to make sure that you have created your profile on helloalice.com. It is a free to join platform, so make sure you create that profile, you complete that profile, you sign up for our newsletter, and of course, engage with us on social media so that you don't miss a thing. But thank you all so much, and go support a small business. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.